Today's lesson is for section 6.2, factoring quadratic trinomials in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is equal to 1. In order to do this, we have 5 steps to follow. The first step with any factoring problem is always to factor out the greatest common factor if there is one. The next step in this process is to identify our values of a, b, and c. Next, I'm going to create and complete a diamond. When I set up my diamond, the top part of our diamond is going to be a times c, and the bottom part is b. And you guys know that when we're doing our diamond, we're trying to find numbers that multiply to the top number and add to the bottom. Once I've created my diamond, I'm going to rewrite the polynomial using the numbers from the diamond, and my final step is going to be to factor by grouping. Now let's look at an example together. Let's factor x squared plus 11x plus 24. The first thing I need to do is look for a common factor. In this case, there are no common factor amongst the 3 terms, so I'm going to start going to step 2 and identify a, b, and c. A is the coefficient of the squared term, so in this case, since there's nothing written in front of the x squared, we know that it is assumed to be a 1. B is in front of the linear term or in front of x, so my coefficient in this case for b is 11. And my value for c is my constant 24. Now when I start setting up my diamond, I'm going to multiply a by c, so 1 times 24 is 24. And my value of b is 11. So now I need to identify numbers that multiply to 24 but add to 11. In this case, it would be 8 and 3, because 8 times 3 is 24, and 8 plus 3 is 11. My next step is to rewrite my polynomial using the numbers from my diamond. I'm going to keep my first term x squared, plus the 11x is what's going to change. I'm going to break it down into 8x, the 8 from my diamond, plus 3x, and then I still have my plus 24. At this point, I can now factor by grouping. So we know I'm going to group together my first pair of terms. My common factor between x squared and 8x is x, so I'm going to pull that out, and I'll have x times x plus 8. Then I group together my second 2 terms. The common factor between 3x and 24 is 3, so I'm going to pull out a positive 3, and that leaves me with 3 times x plus 8. I got the same binomial factor in each, so now I know to finish factoring by grouping, I'm going to pull the x plus 8 out front and multiply that by the remaining quantities, x plus 3. So my factored form is the quantity of x plus 8 times the quantity of x plus 3. The other option that I have for factoring after I've used my diamond is to use the area model. If I'm using the area model, the way I set it up is that my first term, the ax squared, always goes in the top left corner, and c always goes in the bottom right corner. The remaining 2 values in here come from our diamond. So let's take an example, or let's look at our example using the area model to finish factoring. So we're going to use the same diamond that we already created, but now we're going to write our ax squared term in this first box. So I'm going to put in x squared and the constant 24 down in our bottom right-hand box. Now in the center, I'm going to put in the numbers from the diamond. So I'm going to have an 8x and a 3x. Now if we use our strategy of finding the greatest common factor between every pair of vertical and horizontal terms, we can factor this. The greatest common factor between x squared and 3x is x. between 8x and 24 is 8. The greatest common factor between x squared and 8x is x, and the greatest common factor between 3x and 24 is 3. So now my factored form would be the quantity of x plus 8 times the quantity of x plus 3. So whether I factor by grouping or I use the area model, I get the same result. So the choice is yours as to which method will work best for you. The next example we're looking at is to factor 2x squared minus 12x minus 80. The first thing I do is to always look for the greatest common factor. Since all my numbers are even, they share a common factor of 2, so I'm going to pull out that 2 first. It's going to be 2 times the quantity of x squared minus 6x minus 40. Now that I've pulled out the greatest common factor, I'm going to identify my a, b, and c, but I'm going to use the factored trinomial. So my value of a is 1, my value of b is negative 6, and my value of c is negative 40. So when I plug my values into the diamond, I'm going to multiply 1 by negative 40 to get negative 40. And then my value of b is negative 6. Since I'm multiplying to a negative number, I know one of the numbers has to be negative. And in this case, I know it's the larger number because it has to add to a negative number. The factors of negative 40 that sum to negative 6 are negative 10 and positive 4. So now I can rewrite my polynomial as x squared minus 10x plus 4x minus 40. And now I can factor by grouping. When I group my first pair of terms, the greatest common factor between x squared and 10x is x. When I pull out the x, I'm left with x minus 10. My last pair of terms, 4x and negative 40, share a common factor of 4, so I pull out the 4, and I'm left with, again, x minus 10. When I pull out that common binomial factor of x minus 10, my other binomial factor is x plus 4, and I need to remember to take that 2 that I factored out at the beginning and put it in front of my final answer. So my factored form is 2 times the quantity of x minus 10 times the quantity of x plus 4. Instead of factoring by grouping, if I want to employ the area model for the example we just did, I'm going to put my squared term up in the top left box again, x squared, and my constant negative 40 in the bottom right. My remaining 2 boxes are going to be filled out with the numbers from the diamond, so negative 10x and 4x. Now if I find the greatest common factor between each pair of vertical terms, the greatest common factor between x and 4x is x, and between negative 10x and negative 40 is negative 10. Anytime I have 2 negative numbers, I'm always going to pull out a negative factor. Then looking at the pairs of vertical terms, the greatest common factor between x squared and negative 10x is x, and between 4x and negative 40 is 4. So my final factored form is the quantity of x minus 10 times the quantity of x plus 4, and then I also need to remember the 2 that I factored out at the beginning needs to go in front. So the final factored form is 2 times the quantity of x minus 10 times the quantity of x plus 4. At this point, please go and see the substitute to get your homework and try working on some practice problems. Have a great day. Bye.